Hi, and welcome to our podcast. I'm David Braddock, host for the Rise from the Ashes podcast. We're talking today with Susan Mundahl of Mundahl Law. How are you, Susan?
I'm good, David.
We're just having a natural discussion about the grieving process.
Is that a natural discussion? What do you think?
Well, it sounded natural when I said it.
Well, the reason I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek is when you're talking about grieving, everyone sees it as such a deep, sad topic, and it is. Talking about grief can be a tough topic, but I think it's really important in the context of divorce, and that's why I want to talk about it today. What do you know about the stages of grief?
Well, just off the top of my head, I know that you start with denial, and then it can go to anger, and then it goes to bargaining, and after that comes depression. Finally, if you're just looking at the 5, and I know there may have been a couple of others added, it should end up on acceptance. However, those various things can present themselves at other times during the course of the process of grieving, whatever it might be, a death of a loved one or just a general loss of a loved one through divorce, for example.
Yep, that's right. And that's really what I want to get into today. And the other important thing, they can come and go. So you can be in depression and then go into bargaining, and then you can go back to anger and blame and all of those things. Understand it's a dynamic process. But the important part about the grieving process is that you need to work your way through each stage as it comes up.
But the way that I understand it, as you say, they are going to present themselves. So if, let's just say, a prior one presents itself again, then that means, as you're suggesting, that that's just something that you're going to need to deal with again.
Well, in fact, years ago, a psychologist said in one of my divorce classes, the problem with divorce, as opposed to death of a spouse, is that it's recurring grief. Because of the fact that every single time a spouse doesn't show up on time for their parenting time, or they don't pay the child support on time, or they get a new girlfriend or boyfriend, all of those things can take you right back into the grief cycle again if you haven't fully worked your way through the grief.
And it seems like a common stage that perhaps comes up during the divorce process in particular is the stage of anger, because when certain of those things present themselves again or they recur again, then that will make the other spouse just get angry again at having situations arise that they got angry with in the first place.
But just understand, anger is actually, it's a fear response. So we get angry when we fear something. And I think it's really important for people, anytime that anger comes up, take a step back and they say, why am I so angry about this? It could be that they're feeling frustrated or trapped or powerless or hurt. That's a really important thing to realize, because if you stay in anger and blame, that's the other emotion that's tied with anger. You're not comfortable with this emotion. And so it's like, it's all your fault. And then that's a way of changing the focus of the anger. At the end of the day, it's just not a helpful emotion. In fact, in a recent book I read on grief and dying, the author said, if it lasts longer than 15 seconds, it's old anger, and that it's not worth keeping. Because the point of anger is to drive you into action. So take a step back, think about, why am I angry? And then look at, why are you having that emotion? And I guarantee you, it's something within yourself. It's not really about the other person. And that's the point I want to make about this, as being able to move forward with your divorce. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, particularly with respect to anger. When we're talking about the grief process with respect to some of these other stages, how are they approached, or how are they understood to be a part of it with respect to divorce?
Really, all of them. In fact, the first one is actually denial. Anger is certainly one of the initial responses, but it can also be, this isn't happening to me. I see that come up a lot when the person who has been served with papers comes to me. They are stunned. The whole purpose of denial, which is really about, this can't be happening. So again, it's a natural emotion to have, but you have to move beyond it. Because honestly, if you have been served with papers, it is happening. And the longer you stay in denial, and in any of these initial emotions, the longer your divorce is going to take and the more expensive it's going to be. That's what I can say about those two. And we can talk about the next ones.
That really is clear about the denial, and then we've covered anger pretty clearly as well. So then the next one, the way I understand it, and again, as you point out, they can recur and they can change places, but the next one would be the bargaining. I suppose
Yes.
that comes into the contractual arrangement. The way I understand from our previous discussions and the other podcasts is that you've got a marriage contract, you're terminating the marriage contract, here comes those stages of grief with respect to that, and you're going to be altering it and doing another contract. Well, there's bargaining that has to take place.
Right. But when you're talking about the emotion of bargaining within the grief cycle,
Okay.
that's different. That situation happens when, like, a wife says, I want a divorce, and husband says, I will do anything. If you want me to go to counseling, I'll go to counseling. Okay. Okay. You want me to be a better parent? Okay. I'll take a parenting class. Oh, but if I agree to do that, will you please stop this divorce? That's the kind of bargaining I'm talking about.
Oh, that is really clear as well now. Yep.
Yeah. It's the kind of bargaining that says, I'll do anything to stop this from happening. And the problem with that is it's not genuine or heartfelt. It is only done for the purpose of honestly denying the inevitable, which is a divorce. The important point is if it's not honest, if it's not genuine, then the person is not going to carry through. They'll maybe go to 1 or 2 counseling sessions, and the next thing you know, you're back in the same toxic situation that you were before. And in fact, David, what I've seen is they will convince their spouse to go and stop the divorce. They convince them to get all the money back from the attorney, and then they go and spend it in other ways, leaving that initial outgoing spouse in a more desperate financial situation than they would have been if they'd simply continued with the divorce. It is done to take control and to deny the other person the ability to be able to move forward. And that's very toxic.
Okay. Well, then moving along to the one prior to the final one would be depression. And it seems to me with respect to depression, it does take place just prior to acceptance because you are starting to accept, in a way, the likelihood or the inevitability that this is happening and that's going to cause the depression.
You're exactly right. What is important to note about each of these, again, is they are natural responses. Before Elisabeth Kübler-Ross defined these stages, people thought, hey, buck up, don't have those emotions. And now we recognize they are important. And so it is, as you say, depression is an important acknowledgement that the divorce is happening, that your life is changing, but you're grieving the loss of that life that you had thought you were going to have forever, because marriage is supposed to be forever.
Right. That was the original oath that both parties took.
And not only that, there is also the fact that marriage is an archetype. It is one we believe should be happily ever after, and we believe that it should be in sickness and in health. The problem is it doesn't say in the oath we took that it involves if our partner is gambling and has gambled away our house and our retirement. It doesn't include if our spouse is or we are chemically dependent or alcoholic. It doesn't include abuse. That's the problem.
Or perhaps taking on another relationship simultaneously.
Well, right. There's all the myriad ways that divorce happens. But if you think about it, it's giving up the fairy tale of what your marriage was really about and accepting the reality that it was not as you thought it was going to be. And so depression is a natural way our physical body needs to release that grief of, wow, everything I thought about that this was all about, it isn't. And so I think that that is a necessary step before finally going, okay, I can accept this.
Aren't there a couple of others that fit into the pattern of the grief cycle prior to acceptance?
Well, one that actually isn't identified or even mentioned by Kübler-Ross, but which I read years ago in a book about divorce, which I really liked, was the emotion of ambivalence. And that's not one that's really talked about, but I think it is important to acknowledge your ambivalence about your spouse and the fact that you've loved this person. Love doesn't go away, but it's like, even if you love someone, there are situations where you can't live with that person anymore. And so you are ambivalent. You are feeling the love, and yet at the same time, the pull that you're not getting your own needs met. I think ambivalence is an important middle stage that people going through divorce need to really grapple with and come to some acceptance, even just on that. But on the whole, they are ready to move forward with their divorce.
Are there any others that we're missing on before we get to acceptance entirely?
There's another one that I do want to talk about that just came up recently, and that is feeling vindicated.
Okay.
The reason I want to talk about it is because potentially, that emotion of being vindicated. But if it's done in a sense of having to feel like they're better than the other person, then I think it's a negative emotion and is not a part of just accepting. It's not being respectful to your spouse. I think it even goes back to blame. If you feel vindicated, it means that you feel like you have some control over the other person. If you think about it in terms of, let's say, high school, and you think someone bullied you, and you tell a friend, and that friend says, yeah, they bullied you. You didn't deserve that. There's a part of you that feels vindicated, but it involves having the other person be bad. And that's where I'm saying I don't think it's a healthy response to continue in that vein, moving forward with your life, because this spouse, very probably you share children with. If you're going around feeling like you need to have power over this other person, how can you effectively co-parent going forward with your kids?
Every time that I observe one of these things, whether it's in something where there's some real people involved, or even perhaps in a situation in some drama or situation comedy, whatever it might be, you are not going to be an effective parent if you are directing anything negative towards the other parent. It's going to affect those children.
You got it. And I think that that's a really important thing to deal with. If you feel you have to be vindicated, like you have to have outside approval from someone else that you're right and they're wrong, you're still stuck in your negative emotions and you are not in acceptance. That's an important stage.
Definitely. And so then I suppose it's try to be a little bit more self-assured that if you go back to more positive perspectives, then you can get back on the right track, even if it's to explore some of those earlier stages of the grieving process.
In fact, I think it involves moving into compassion. If you can feel compassion for the other person as a response, but it's not possible, as long as you're going through grief, for you to be able to move beyond that into compassion for your spouse. It's probably something that's going to happen after the divorce.
But now we are actually moving towards acceptance. Because if you can at least begin to feel even a small amount of compassion for the other parent or other spouse, then you are getting to that acceptance point.
I agree. That is where you want to be, preferably at the end of your divorce, but certainly before you can move forward with your life. You and I both know about people who stay stuck in these other bitter emotions for the rest of their life. And I don't want that for any of my divorce clients or anyone going through a divorce. I want them to reach acceptance, to fully embrace that this divorce is simply a time of transition, and it's going to allow them to move into a better life. And actually, that is the goal. It should be the goal of everyone going through divorce. Look to the future, to accept what is, and simply take the steps so that they can move into doing things better. Even if it is learning to relate in a better way to that spouse so that you can enter into new relationships that are going to be healthier.
Yes, learn from what you're dealing with and so that you can be more effective as you move forward with your life. I love that. Is there anything else that we're not covering about acceptance?
The only other point to make about acceptance is it doesn't mean great. This is a great idea. and to be, oh, this is so much better. Acceptance can be, I can live with this. You talked about doing bargaining, but I call it negotiations in a final settlement. And you're correct that it is going to be a contract, and reaching contract terms that are fair and equitable with your partner. Those are things that are important. And certainly if you can get to that stage at the end of your divorce, you're far better off than the people who still hold anger and bitterness. And I have a case right now where they're going up on appeal because they went to trial, and trial is one of the worst things you can do in a divorce because you have no way to release your anger and bitterness. And in fact, you remain focused on, I'm right, you're wrong. And so you can't move forward with your life when you do that. And the appeal process only continues that feeling that I'm right, you're wrong, and needing to defend yourself.
And both parties are looking for that vindication that you talked about.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's not going to help them move forward with their life.
Now, I understand you've been doing some writing on this topic. Can you tell us anything about that, Susan?
Only to say stay tuned, because I'm finalizing it and we're talking to publishers. Hopefully there's going to be a book called The Emotional Divorce, and things you can do to help move forward in a positive fashion emotionally going through divorce.
Well, we'll look forward to that and perhaps discuss it on a future podcast.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, Susan. You are listening to Rise from the Ashes, the podcast channel that takes a careful look at all things having to do with legal procedure within the family law process. Rise from the Ashes is sponsored by Mundahl Law, who specializes in assisting families and individuals through the legal process with respect, dignity, and caring. Mundahl Law is dedicated to helping people to solve their legal problems. You can visit the Mundahl Law website at mundahllaw.com or call to schedule a consultation with one of their qualified family law attorneys. Rise from the Ashes, focusing on matters of the family, because family matters.